Hey guys, so in this video I thought I would talk about my favorite podcasts. And I know, a YouTube video talking about podcasts, how original. Well, it's as original as all my other content. So here we go. So at first, I really wasn't a person who listened to podcasts. I was like, I'm not pretentious, I won't listen to podcasts. Like, I don't need to do that. And then I realized about two years ago, podcasts are actually awesome. I think it was about 3 years ago that podcasts are actually pretty cool. And it's my podcast journey started with the Pirate History podcast with Matt. It's like over 200 episodes. They're over 45 minutes long, I think, usually each episode. And it kind of covers pirate history. And at that point in time, I had really enjoyed pirate TV shows or anything that had to do with British history and like naval maritime. That was like my niche at that moment. And so the Pirate History podcast came at a perfect time for me. And so for about 6 months, I would listen to 2 or 3 episodes of that every day. I'm still working my way through the podcast. I think I'm still in the 1700s. And I just really enjoyed it, and that's kind of got me started listening to podcasts. And it was just a really good way. I'm just going to keep talking about Matt. I just love his podcast so much. But that's kind of started me into podcasts, and it is one of my favorites, but it's not one I listen to so much anymore now that I'm talking about it. Right now, I'm probably going to go download some episodes to listen to tomorrow on the train. And yeah. So that's how I kind of how I got started with podcasts. And then after that, I started doing some more research and I started listening to more kind of podcasts. So the ones I'm going to talk about now are my favorite ones at the moment, and the ones that I've kind of been enjoying for the past couple years since I've gotten into podcasts. So these aren't really ranked in any order. These are just podcasts I like. So Dear Hank and John with John and Hank Green. So it's basically an advice podcast where people can send questions into John and Hank and they answer them. And I kind of just like listening to it whenever maybe I'm anxious or there's something that's upsetting me, or I just need like a calm voice. Like I've talked about in other videos, John and Hank Green are like my comfort people. I've always like enjoyed their writing, and I've watched their videos since I was a kid. So their podcast is kind of like a breath of fresh air, and I kind of like hearing the perspectives, and their advice isn't always helpful. It usually isn't, but it's just nice to hear people talk about things from their perspective and kind of seeing how they've grown over time by listening from their podcast from the beginning. And then from that, John Green's podcast, The Anthropocene Review, which he was able to turn into a book, is something that I've always enjoyed. So I think The Anthropocene Review I don't think it has that many episodes. I think it's at least under 30, but not over that. And basically, he kind of reviews random things within like the human world, or at least our human experience, and rates them on a 5-star scale. And when I was working really early mornings, I would put this on while I was getting ready before it was even bright out. And the sun would rise every morning, and I would be listening to this man kind of romanticize and describe these things that I would take for granted, like Canadian geese or Diet Dr. Pepper. And kind of like makes you think about all the little things that make up all the big things in our lives, because everything that we have had to come from somewhere, and his podcast kind of reminds you of that. And I was very excited when his book came out. I don't have the copy with me, but I was able to get one of his signed copies at Target. I was so excited when I saw it in the store the week it came out that I was able to get one, and it's back home right now. But it is one of my treasured possessions, and when I get married, it'll probably be going with me. So I really love that book and that podcast. And then a podcast that I've started to actually just recently listen to in the past month or two is Growing with the Flow with Nina Florence. I think she's on YouTube, but I think she's from England, and she just kind of answers questions and talks about her week, and it's just kind of a relaxing podcast that you could just kind of put on while you're driving, and it's just a nice time. It's easy listening, and kind of get some advice, and yeah. And then a more informative podcast that I enjoy is Ladies We Need to Talk. So this is an Australian-based podcast, and I really enjoyed this one. This is when, back in, I think, January or February of this year, I started looking at more into women's health, and I realized there's actually not that many resources to find. I had a hard time finding resources that talked about women's health and women's issues. And so when I found Ladies We Need to Talk, I was very excited, and I spent like a whole 2 weeks just catching up on all the podcasts. So now I'm caught up with that podcast, and they put episodes out every couple of weeks so far. I think they've been kind of slow with the summer, but basically episodes cover things like birth control, periods, menopause, kind of things that you don't really talk about, but things that affect all of us and will affect all of us, even if you don't have a vagina. And I just really enjoyed listening to that podcast, and it kind of made me feel a lot better because I was able to get a lot more information that I didn't have. And you get to hear from doctors, you get to hear from people's personal experiences, and there's no shame associated with the podcast. It explores why we would feel shame when talking about these topics that have to do with our bodies, but it doesn't exploit those ideas. And then the last podcast is Sweet Boys, which is Garrett and Andrew's podcast. You probably know them from YouTube. It's just a silly, goofy podcast. When I would play it at work, and my boss, she would be like, "What nonsense are you listening to?" And I'm like, "It's funny." And she'd listen to it for a couple minutes, and she'd start laughing. It's just a good podcast. It's goofy, and it always provides a laugh. So it's something that I really enjoy listening to. They have finished season 1. I don't know when season 2 will come out, but I'm excited for it. So those are some of my favorite podcasts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a nice week. Bye!